My name's Matt, I'm 41, and I live in Billings, Montana, though to be honest, it's never really felt like home. I guess when you've been carrying old wounds for so long, no place quite feels like it fits. The wound that shaped me? Well, that would be my mom. She kicked me out when I was 17, told me point blank that she needed to focus on our new family. And just like that, I was yesterday's news. At first, it didn't register. I kept thinking she'd call, that she'd come to her senses. But the days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months, and the only thing that came was silence. Meanwhile, she married a guy named Dennis, a wiry man with a booming laugh, and had 2 more kids, Derek and Kayla, who became the center of her world. I scraped by, worked double shifts at a diner, slept in a friend's basement, and when college came around, I paid my own way. Scholarships, grants, loans, you name it. And when I finally walked across that graduation stage, I remember scanning the crowd, no familiar face waiting. Just an empty chair where my mother should have been. But here's the twist. Years later, after all that distance and pain, she resurfaced. Not with an apology, not with regret, but with a demand that I help pay for Derek and Kayla's college. Yeah, you can imagine how that felt. I remember the moment she called like it seared into my brain. It was a Tuesday night, cold enough that the windows rattled in their frames, and I was settling in with a beer, half watching some rerun on TV when the phone lit up. Mom. For a second, I just stared at the screen. My finger hovered over ignore, but some part of me, the same foolish part that still wanted her approval, made me answer. Her voice was all sweetness, dripping with nostalgia, like we'd just spoken yesterday. She said she was so proud of me that Derek had been accepted into Montana State and Kayla was eyeing a fancy art school back east. I waited, feeling the tension creep up my spine, because I knew there was a but coming. And sure enough, there it was. She wanted to know if I could help with tuition. Not as a loan, as a gift. Because, we're family. I almost dropped the phone. My own mother, who hadn't sent so much as a birthday card in 15 years, was now asking me to bankroll the golden children's futures. I asked her why she thought that was okay, why she thought she had the right. She said, and I swear this is the part that knocked the wind out of me, she said I should be grateful, that I was doing so well now because of the tough love she showed me. Grateful. Can you believe that? It felt surreal, like a bad dream you wake up from, except I was wide awake. My phone buzzed on the nightstand a few times after the call, first a text from her. Let's be adults about this. Matt, we're family. Then one from Dennis, her husband, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. That one just said, you owe her this. That line, you owe her this. The next morning, over cold coffee, I kept replaying those words in my head. I owed her? The woman who tossed me aside at 17 like an old jacket? The woman who never came to my graduation, never called on my birthdays, never sent a card when I landed my first job, when I bought my first car, when I scraped together a down payment on this house, I owed her? And here's where things got messy. I wasn't a cold-hearted man. I wanted to believe people could change, even if history told me otherwise. So against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for lunch. Maybe to clear the air. Maybe to hear her out. Maybe, if I'm honest, because some stupid part of me still craved a mother. We met at a diner on Grand Avenue, the kind of place that smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. She walked in wearing a soft pink sweater, her hair pinned up just like I remembered from when I was a kid. For a second, seeing her walk toward me, my heart clenched in my chest. But then she sat down, smiled that rehearsed, fragile smile, and within minutes, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a reconciliation. This was a transaction. She went on about how Derek was so gifted and Kayla had so much potential, how hard they'd worked, and how unfair it was that they might miss out on their dreams because tuition was so expensive. She talked as if the years of silence between us were just a minor hiccup, a blip, as if I should have been waiting in the wings all along, ready to step up when she needed me. And then, just when I thought she'd said the most shocking thing already, she hit me with another blow. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, and said she'd always believed Derek and Kayla deserved better than what she gave me, that they were her second chance to do things right. I sat there, my coffee growing cold, feeling the weight of a lifetime pressing into my chest. That was the moment I knew. She hadn't changed. Not a bit. I wish I could tell you I walked out of that diner right then, cool and composed, with some brilliant parting words. But no, I sat there too long, absorbing the full weight of her words, the years of history behind them. I paid the check, because of course I did. Old habits die hard, and left without looking back. The Montana sky was bruised with clouds, the air sharp enough to sting my cheeks as I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The calls and texts didn't stop. Over the next few days, she doubled down. She left me long, rambling voicemails about how Derek and Kayla were counting on me, how a real man takes care of his family, how I was being spiteful and small. Dennis chimed in again, calling me selfish. Even Derek texted once. I guess she gave him my number, saying he was disappointed in me, that I was better than this. The audacity of it all was dizzying. And then came the kicker. She showed up at my house. It was a Saturday morning, and I was halfway through fixing a loose cabinet door when I heard the knock. There she was on my porch, clutching a manila envelope and wearing that same pink sweater, like she thought looking soft and maternal would break me. She started right in, no greeting, no pause. She explained she had done the math and figured out exactly how much I should contribute. She even had a payment schedule drawn up. I just stared at her, stunned. I told her no. Quietly, firmly. I told her I wasn't paying. That's when the mask slipped. Her face hardened in an instant. Her voice went cold, sharp enough to cut. She accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting where I came from, of being a cold-hearted man who turned his back on his family. She said Derek and Kayla were my blood, and blood was thicker than water. But standing there, something shifted in me. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt clear. I told her, again, calmly, that I didn't owe her anything, that I had built my life without her, that I had paid my own way when she left me to sink or swim, and that now, finally, I was choosing to stop swimming toward her. I was done. She called me cruel. She called me heartless. I opened the door, gestured to the street, and said it was time for her to go. That was the last time I saw her. The first few days after I shut the door on her felt like stepping into silence. I started remembering the day she kicked me out at 17. She'd sat me down on the ratty old sofa, her face tight, her voice sharp but oddly calm. She'd told me Dennis needed a fresh start, that Derek and Kayla deserved better than the chaos I brought into the house. Chaos. That was her word for me getting 2 jobs to help pay rent when Dennis kept quitting his. That was her word for me staying up late to finish schoolwork after pulling double shifts. That day, I packed my things into 2 garbage bags. She didn't even offer a ride. I slept in my friend Nate's basement for weeks, working at the gas station by day and the diner by night, slowly scraping together enough to survive. And now, here she was again, showing up not with regret, not with a single "I'm sorry," but with a calculator and a payment schedule. But here's where it gets interesting. About a week after that final confrontation, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I picked up. It was Kayla. Her voice shook. She said she was sorry for how things went down, sorry for how Mom treated me, sorry for being part of the mess. And then, after a long pause, she said, "I don't want to be like her." That hit me harder than I expected. Kayla told me she wanted to transfer schools, that she was tired of living under the weight of their expectations, that she was working part-time and trying to figure things out for herself. She said she wasn't calling for money. She just wanted to say she understood. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to stay locked in the fortress I'd built around myself. But another part, the part that still believed in people, stayed on the line. We talked for an hour, and as I hung up that night, I realized something. Some cycles don't have to repeat. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest, like something heavy had been lifted, but in its place was this raw, aching emptiness. And then, out of nowhere, Derek called. I almost didn't pick up. My finger hovered over the button, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. But something, maybe stubbornness, maybe curiosity, made me answer. His voice was sharper than Kayla's, his words clipped and defensive. He said he didn't understand why I was punishing them for something they didn't do, why I was turning my back on family. He said Mom was devastated, that she'd been crying for days. I let him talk. I let him spill his practiced lines, his guilt-laced pleas, the things Mom probably rehearsed with him. When he finally paused, I told him the truth. I told him that this wasn't about punishment. It was about survival, about boundaries, about finally choosing myself after a lifetime of being chosen last. I told him that I wished him well, truly, but that I couldn't set myself on fire to keep them warm. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Derek let out a frustrated breath and muttered, "I guess you are as cold as she says." I didn't flinch. Instead, I just said, "Take care of yourself, Derek." And then I hung up. The next day, something strange happened. I went to the grocery store just to pick up coffee and a few basics. As I was walking past the produce aisle, someone called my name. It was Nate, my old friend Nate, the same one whose basement I'd crashed in when I was 17 and had nowhere else to go. We hadn't seen each other in years. He looked the same, just a little grayer around the temples. We ended up grabbing a coffee at the small shop next door, and before I knew it, I was spilling everything. The call from Mom, the demands, Kayla's apology, Derek's anger, all of it. Nate listened, really listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he just shook his head and said, "Matt, you always carried more than was yours to carry." That hit me hard. He told me something else, too, that back when I was 17, he and his folks always wondered why my mother never showed up. They'd watch me come home from late shifts, dragging myself down those basement stairs, and they'd wondered where she was. I realized, sitting across from Nate, that the person I had been back then, that determined, exhausted, hopeful kid, deserved a hell of a lot more kindness than I had ever given him. Later that night, I dug through an old box of photos. It had been years since I looked at them. There I was at 18, standing in my graduation gown with Nate's mom, smiling awkwardly at the camera. There I was at 22, holding the keys to my first car, alone but proud. There I was at 30, in front of this very house, the first thing that was ever truly mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look at those photos with bitterness or grief. I looked at them with pride, because I had survived. And survival, despite everything, was its own kind of victory. A few days after my conversation with Nate, something inside me shifted. For the first time in what felt like years, my life was just mine. I kept thinking about Kayla. A week later, I decided to call her. Not because I had to. Not because I was pressured or guilt into it. But because I wanted to. When she answered, I heard the surprise in her voice. She probably thought I was calling to lecture her, or cut ties completely. But all I said was, "How are you holding up?" That cracked something open. She told me she was working part-time at a bookstore, looking for affordable community college options, staying with a friend because she couldn't stand the tension at home. She sounded lighter, freer, but also scared, like someone stepping into the world without a map for the first time. We talked for over an hour, and for the first time, I realized Kayla wasn't just a symbol of my mother's betrayal. She was her own person, trying to claw her way out of a house I barely escaped myself. That conversation stayed with me for days. Then, unexpectedly, I got a letter in the mail. A real letter, not a bill, not junk, but a handwritten envelope with my name. It was from my mother. I sat at the table for a long time before I opened it. My hands actually shook. Inside, on a folded piece of stationery, she had written exactly 3 sentences. "Matt, I'm sorry you feel this way. I never intended to hurt you. I hope you'll do the right thing for your brother and sister." No apology. No ownership. Just another layer of guilt, tied up in a neat little bow. I set the letter down, and I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so exactly what I should have expected. That night, I went for a long walk under the wide Montana sky, the stars sharp and cold above me. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to reply. Not with anger. Not with money. Not with anything. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. After that night under the stars, something settled inside me. A kind of quiet, like the moment after a storm when the wind dies and the trees stand still. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt free. In the days that followed, I started doing small things for myself. I fixed the old cabinet door that had been hanging loose for months. I cleaned out the garage, finding a box of old college textbooks I'd been meaning to donate. I even dusted off my hiking boots and took a trail up into the Beartooth Mountains, something I hadn't done in years. Life, it turned out, was still waiting for me. And as the weeks passed, something else happened. Kayla kept calling. At first, it was once or twice a week. Then it became every few days. Sometimes she just called to tell me about a frustrating shift at work, or a funny customer, or how she finally saved enough to buy a used car. With every call, I heard a little more strength in her voice, a little more confidence. And slowly, against all my instincts, my heart softened. One night, after a long call where she told me she'd been accepted into the local community college, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and stared at the wall for a long time. Here was this kid, half my age, raised in the same house of broken promises, and she was choosing to be different. She was choosing to be better. And that's when the idea hit me. I didn't owe my mother anything. But maybe, just maybe, I could offer Kayla something that nobody ever offered me. Not money, not rescue, just a lifeline. A quiet presence on the other end of the phone. A voice saying, "You're not alone." Because in the end, that's what I'd wanted all along, someone to remind me that even when family failed, I was still worth something. And maybe, just maybe, I could be that someone for her. The next few weeks felt like a quiet rebuilding. I didn't make any big declarations. I didn't call Kayla to say, "I'm here for you now." Instead, I just kept answering when she called. I listened. I asked questions. I offered advice only when she asked for it. And little by little, I watched something remarkable happen. Trust, that fragile thing I had almost forgotten how to hold, started to grow between us. One afternoon, Kayla told me she was scared to tell Mom she was staying in community college instead of transferring to some overpriced private school. She worried Mom would take it as failure, as proof that Kayla was wasting her potential. I told her something I wish someone had told me at her age. I said, there's more than one kind of success in this world, and the best kind is the one you build on your own terms. Kayla went quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Thanks, Matt." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that thanks, how it cut through years of silence, anger, and disappointment like a small light in a dark tunnel. Meanwhile, my mother stayed silent. No more letters. No more calls. And for the first time, I didn't go looking for her voice in every quiet room. One day, out of nowhere, Dennis called. I saw his name flash on my phone and almost didn't pick up. But curiosity got the better of me. His voice was tight, measured, almost formal. He said they were struggling to cover some home repairs, that things had been difficult since I cut ties, that Derek was busy and Kayla was off doing her own thing. He danced around the subject, but the meaning was clear. They wanted money. I told him no. Calm, firm, no. He sighed, said something about how family should help family, and I just quietly replied, I did help. For 17 years. I think I've done my part. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Kayla called again, voice hesitant. She said Dennis was upset, that Mom had been stomping around the house, slamming cabinets, muttering under her breath. She sounded almost guilty, like she was bracing for me to lash out. But I didn't. I just told her, you're not responsible for their choices, Kayla. She exhaled into the phone, soft and shaky, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were both learning how to let go of the weight we were never meant to carry. The first snow came early that year in Billings. I remember waking up to a world wrapped in white, the trees heavy with frost, the streets softened, the world quieter than usual. I stood at the window for a long time, coffee in hand, watching the flakes drift down, feeling something settle inside me that I hadn't felt in years, peace. It wasn't the peace of everything being fixed. It wasn't the peace of a neat, happy ending. It was the peace of acceptance. I would never get the mother I wanted. I would never get the childhood I deserved. And no amount of success, no number of paychecks, no act of generosity would rewrite that story. But I was still here. I had built something out of the scraps they left me. I had turned empty pockets and a broken heart into a life with roots, into a home that was mine. And now somehow, I had Kayla on the other end of the line, finding her own way, learning her own strength. That first snow felt like a quiet kind of closure. A week later, Kayla called again. She told me she'd moved into a tiny apartment with a friend, was picking up extra shifts at the bookstore, and had signed up for classes in the spring. She sounded nervous, but there was a spark in her voice, the sound of someone stepping into her own life. At the end of the call, just as I was about to hang up, she said something I'll never forget. I'm proud of you, Matt. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. No one in my family had ever said those words to me. Not once. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and said, I'm proud of you too, kid. And as I sat there, the snow falling softly outside, I realized something simple but true. Some families we're born into. Some families we build ourselves. And sometimes, the family you build is the one that saves you in the end.